The wind moved like a tired animal across the high plain, dragging dust and scraps of dry grass, until they settled against the rotting boards of the old border fort. It was the kind of place time forgot. Paint stripped to gray, the flag above it no more than threads clinging to splintered wood. In the middle of it all, a single figure sat on the porch rail, his hat tipped low against the dying sun, a battered Sharp's rifle resting across his knees. Elias Crow had long ago stopped counting the years he'd spent here. They had the same shape anyway. Long, quiet days, a horizon that never came closer, and nights filled with the creak of timbers in the wind. He was a big man, but not in the way of youth. His frame was lined with the slow heaviness of age, each scar a written line in a story nobody had asked to hear. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice carried the weight of dust and campfire smoke. Out past the low rise, the prairie swelled and felt like the chest of some sleeping giant. Coyotes threaded the grass, their shapes melting into gold and shadow. Elias watched them without interest. A man who has seen too much has little left to fear from what roams the open land. But tonight, something sat wrong in the air. The smell came first, thin, bitter, riding the wind. It was the kind of smell you never forget if you've been near it before. Not cooking, not a campfire, but the thick black reek of something large burning. Elias lifted his head, eyes narrowing against the glare of the sun sinking low. Far off, with a lamb at the sky in a wavering line, a column of smoke climbed straight and dark. He didn't move right away. War had taught him the cost of rushing toward a thing you don't understand. Instead, he leaned the rifle against a rail and stepped down into the yard, his boots making the earth crunch underfoot. Bristle, the rangy brown dog who had followed him home one winter and stayed, rose from under the porch and padded to his side. The animal's ears twitched, nose working. They stood there until the sun tipped fully under, leaving the smoke a shadow in the darkening sky. The wind carried nothing now but the faintest trace of what had been burning. It was nearly full dark when he heard it. Faint at first, a sound swallowed by the rustle of dry grass. Hoofbeats, slow and uneven. Elias took up the rifle again and walked toward the gate, Bristle close behind. The rider emerged from the gloom as though the night itself had shaped him, a narrow man on a sweat-lathered pony. His body bent over the animal's neck. Elias caught the shine of wetness on his shirt before the man swayed and slid from the saddle. Elias caught him under the arms and half dragged him inside the gate. The man's skin was the deep copper of the desert tribes, his hair matted with dust and blood. In the flicker of the lantern Elias set on the table, the face was young, but the eyes were already receding, as though pulling away from the world. "You're hurt bad," Elias said, setting him down against the wall. The man tried to speak, but coughed instead, bringing up a smear of red. He swallowed hard, forced words out. "They're coming. By dawn." "Who?" Elias's voice was low, but the question was sharp. The man's gaze locked on his, dark and fierce even in the weakness of pain. "Riders. Many. They burn as they go. They will take everything." Elias felt something turn over in his chest, an old feeling he hadn't wanted to touch. "Where?" "From the south." The man's breath rattled. "They are not like the others. They don't stop." The lantern light shook as a gust pushed through the cracks in the walls. Bristle's ears pricked toward the south, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Elias leaned closer, his shadow falling over the dying man. "How many?" The man's lips moved, but the number was lost in the cough that racked his body. Then, with the last of his strength, he gripped Elias's wrist and whispered something else, low enough that the wind nearly carried it away. Elias heard the words, but they seemed to pull him back through years he had worked hard to bury. He stayed there until the man's grip loosened and his head fell sideways. Elias closed man's eyes, then went to gate. The smoke to the south was gone now, swallowed by night, but he knew it hadn't ended. Inside, he lit another lantern, set it by the rifle, and took inventory without thinking. Rounds counted, powder checked, canteens filled. The habits came back smooth, like muscle remembering old work. He didn't tell himself he was staying. He didn't have to. There was nowhere else to go. The moon was high when he stepped outside again. The prairie lay silent under its pale light, a silver sea broken by the black ribs of the fort's fence. Somewhere out there, Riders were closing the distance. He could feel in the way the night pressed against him, in the taste of the air. Bristle sat beside him, tail still, eyes fixed on the southern dark. Elias rested a hand on the dog's head, fingers brushing the coarse fur. "It's coming again," he said quietly, though whether to the dog or himself, he didn't know. The horizon held nothing. But the emptiness was a lie. By dawn they would come. The body of the scout lay wrapped in an old canvas near the gate, the desert wind tugging at its edges, as if impatient to carry him away. Elias had buried enough men to know there would be no time for a grave now. He left him where the morning sun could find him, a silent marker to anyone coming after. The horizon was still pale when Elias climbed the watchtower. The land stretched open in all directions, empty in its way, but the emptiness was a thin skin over something that moved. Somewhere out there, riders were crossing that skin, and the day would not end before they arrived. He took a long drink from his canteen, then began his slow walk along the wall. The fort's bones were old, boards weathered, nails rusted, hinges sagging under their own weight. He had patched where he could, but most of it would never be strong again. Holding the line here would be like keeping water in a woven basket. Bristle followed at his heel, nails clicking on the warp boards. The dog's ears turned toward every small sound, the shift of grass and wind, the groan of a distant tree, the quick wing beat of quail startled into the air. Elias trusted that sense more than his own eyes. By mid-morning, a small shape appeared on the trail from the east. A wagon, its canvas bowed with age, wheels cutting uneven grooves into the hard earth. He took up the rifle and watched through the scope until he saw a woman's figure at the reins and 2 children huddled under the cover. He could have waved them away. Should have. Maybe. But something in the way the woman's head turned at each sound told him she already knew trouble was close. When they drew near, he unbarred the gate. The woman reined in, looking him over without speaking. She was lean, her hair pulled back with a strip of worn leather, her skin carrying both the pale tone of an Irish father and the bronze warmth of an Apache mother. Her eyes were green, bright in the shade of the brimmed hat she wore, but guarded. "Water?" she asked, voice flat. Elias nodded toward the well inside. "You can water the team, but you'll need to move on quick." She dismounted and led the horse to drink, the children following close. The boy looked to be 10, his hand on the smaller girl's shoulder as if he could shield her from the whole wide land. The girl clutched a rag doll missing an arm. "You're headed the wrong way," Elias said, watching the horizon behind them. "We're headed where we're needed," she replied, not looking at him. "Family in St. Augustine. They're expecting us." "That trail cuts south," he said. "You'll cross open ground for a day before you see the next water." Her gaze sharpened, reading the weight in his tone. "What's coming?" He told her what the scout had said. No names, no numbers, just that they would be here by dawn, and that they would not stop. She glanced at her children, then at the old fort. "You can't hold them alone." "Never said I could." For a moment, they stood in the thin shade of the wall, the space between them tight with unspoken things. Then she nodded once, as if some decision had been made in her head, and began unloading the wagon. Elias didn't argue. Words wouldn't move her anyway. The day turned hotter, the light sharp enough to carve shadows like cuts into the dirt. Elias worked along the walls, pulling boards tighter, setting stakes where the ground had softened. The woman, Maeve, he learned when the boy called her, helped without being told, hauling water, mending a split in the gate with rope from her wagon. The boy asked about the rifle leaning against the tower. Elias showed him how to check the chamber, how to work the lever smooth without jamming it. The boy's hands trembled at first, but steadied under the weight of the lesson. The girl stayed near Bristle, feeding him scraps from her pocket. The dog took them gently, then settled beside her like an old guardian. By late afternoon, the work slowed. The air felt thick, as though holding its breath. Clouds rolled in from the west, fat with rain, but moving slow. In their shadow, the world seemed closer, the horizon drawing in like a tightened noose. Maeve stood on the wall beside him, scanning the south. "How many do you think?" "Enough," he said. "And still you'll stay?" He didn't answer. The truth was he didn't know if staying meant anything, Not with these walls and the ground so open beyond. But leaving wasn't in him. Not this time. She studied him for a long moment, then looked away. Men like you, she said, they don't know when to let go of dying. The word sat between them like a stone. Neither would move. It was near sunset when Elias saw them, shapes on the ridge, black against the burning sky. They didn't move like travelers. They stood still, lined across the rise, the last light catching on steel and the pale bone of spear tips. Maeve's hand found the rail. How far? Close enough to be here by morning. They didn't linger in sight. As the sun dropped, the ridge emptied, swallowed by the dark. But the image of them stayed, burned into the back of Elias's mind. He loaded the rifle slow, each round a sound in the silence. Maeve gathered her children into the wagon bed, making a nest of blankets where they could sleep, though sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. Elias stayed on the wall until the first stars came out, the land below a black ocean with no shore. Somewhere in that dark, hooves shifted, voices murmured in a language older than the fort itself. When he climbed down, Mae was waiting in the yard. She looked at him without speaking, the lantern between them casting her shadow long across the dirt. "They'll be here," he said. She nodded once. "Then we'll be ready." The night closed in around them, heavy and certain. Far to the south, something moved, a sound like the low roll of distant thunder, steady, drawing closer. The first light came thin and gray, bleeding into the clouds like smoke through wet cloth. The air was damp, the kind that clung to skin and made the wood underfoot swell. Elias stood on the wall, rifle resting in the crook of his arm, eyes fixed on the southern edge of the world. They appeared all at once, dark shapes spilling over the rise, the earth seeming to carry them forward. Riders, a dozen at first, then more, their formation loose but purposeful. Sunlight broke in thin strips between clouds, flashing off rifle barrels, glinting along the edges of blades. Bristle's growl was low and steady. Mae was beside Elias, hair tied back tight, the sleeves of her blouse rolled to the elbow. Her eyes never left the approaching line. "They'll test us first," Elias said quietly. Small pushes, then the weight. The boy was on the lower wall, repeating the motions Elias had taught him. Load, lever, breathe. His hands no longer trembled. The girl sat near the wagon, doll in her lap, eyes wide but dry. She watched Bristle more than she watched the horizon. The first shots came sharp and fast, more for noise than harm. Elias answered with a single, careful round that dropped the rider from his saddle. The rest pulled back, wheeling in the dust. The forts which shuddered under the strike of bullets and arrows. Splinters fell like dry rain. Made fire from the corner. Her stance sure, face set in a hard calm. Elias noted she didn't waste shots. Each one chosen. Each one counted. When the attack pulled back, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had been. Smoke from the rifles hung in the air, mixing with the scent of churned dirt and horse sweat. "They'll come again," Elias said, scanning the ground. "They'll keep coming," Maeve replied, reloading without looking at him. The second push came harder, riders splitting into two flanks. Elias shifted to meet them, his shots methodical, the sharps report cracking across the field. Maeve held the gate, picking off anyone who came close enough to throw fire or cut through the boards. An arrow hissed past Elias's ear, striking the wall behind him with a hollow thunk. The boy flinched but didn't drop his rifle. Bristle barked sharply, darting along the wall, as if marking where the danger pressed nearest. Then came the smell, sharp and oily. Elias spotted it quick, a rag-wrapped torch sailing through the air, hitting the outer boards. The flame caught slow at first, licking upward in thin threads before thickening into orange teeth. Elias vaulted down, snatching a bucket from the well and dousing the wall. Steam hissed up, the wood blackened but held. Above him, Maeve kept firing, covering his back. When the attack broke again, midday sun poured down hot and merciless. The air wavered above the ground, turning the riders into shimmering ghosts before they wheeled away toward the ridge. In the low, Elias leaned against the wall, wiping sweat and soot from his brow. Maeve came down from the tower, her blouse clinging damp to her shoulders. "They know how to press," she said. "They've done it before." Her eyes searched his face. "You've seen them?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the canteen she held out, drank deep, then handed it back. "Once," he said finally. "Long ago." There was more he could have told her, but the words were bitter in his mouth. He'd been younger then, a soldier with orders and no room for questions. He remembered the fire, the screaming, the smell of charred wood and flesh. He remembered a woman crouched in the doorway of a burning hut, shielding 2 children with her body. And he remembered raising his rifle anyway. Maeve's gaze sharpened as if she could read the memory in the lines of his face. She didn't ask. She just stepped back, her silence a weight heavier than judgment. The third wave came late in the day, the sun already tipping toward the horizon. This time they came on foot, using the broken ground to close in. Elias's traps went off sharp, wire-triggered charges he'd set in the tall grass. The explosion sent dirt and splinters high, breaking their push and scattering the front line. But some still came, slipping between the blasts. They hit the wall with grapples. Hauling themselves up, Elias met the first with the butt of his rifle, sending him tumbling back into the dust. Another swung over the edge, only to fall under Maeve's shot. By the time they pulled away again, the ground before the fort was littered with dropped weapons and the dark stains of blood. Night came slow but sure, the light bleeding away until the land was nothing but shadow. Elias stood at the gate, the boards warm under his hand from the day's heat. "They'll come harder next time," he said. Maeve adjusted the rifle strap on her shoulder. "And when they do, we hold until we can't." Her eyes met his in the dim light. "And if you fall, then you run." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Somewhere out in the dark, a voice rose, long and low, a call that carried across the plain. Others answered, the sound building into something that set the hair on Elias's arm standing. Maeve's hand tightened on her rifle. The boy came to stand beside her, the girl clutching his shirt. Bristle growled deep in his chest, staring at the gate as if he could already see what was coming. Elias chambered the next round, the click loud in the quiet. The night was holding its breath, and so were they. The voice called again, closer this time. The sky cracked open with the first strike. A flash lit the clouds, and thunder rolled in behind it, the sound mingling with the thud of hooves on wet ground. The rain came in slanting sheets, turning dust to dark mud, masking the approach until riders were nearly at the wall. Elias took his place at the gate, the sharp steady against his shoulder. Mae was above him in the tower, her figure cut in black against the lightning, the rifle in her hands an extension of her will. The boy crouched at the inner wall, reloading with the rhythm Elias had drilled into him, each cartridge snapping into place with care. Bristle moved along the yard, low to the ground, tail stiff, teeth bare at the dark shapes pressing in. They came all at once, shadows breaking from the black, boots sinking the churned earth, voices raised in a language Elias half knew from long ago. Muzzle flashes sparked in the rain. Each shot answered from the walls. Wood shuddered. Nails sang in their holes, and the air filled with the smell of wet powder. The leader showed himself in the break between strikes of lightning. A tall figure astride a black horse, painted in streaks of red and white. In his hand was a rusted saber, its grip wrapped in worn leather Elias recognized even before the light caught it. Memory snapped sharp. That saber had hung at the side of his old command of the day. They rode into the village. The leader's gaze locked on him across the chaos. In the rain, under the drum of gunfire, recognition passed between them without a word. Elias saw the boy he'd spared all those years ago, spared only by accident, by the chance that his rifle had jammed in the smoke and screaming. The leader raised the saber, and the riders surged forward. Elias fired until the barrel burned his hand, each shot finding its mark. Maeve's fire was quick and certain, covering the flanks where the wall dipped low. The boy kept the rifles fed, his jaw set, his hands working faster than fear could slow them. An explosion ripped through the left side of the yard, one of Elias's traps claiming the men who had made it to the outer fence. Dirt and rain came down together, and in the brief clearing of smoke, the leader drove his horse straight at the gate. Elias dropped from the wall, meeting him on the churned ground. The impact as the horse broke the weakened boards threw them both into the mud. The saber came down in a silver arc, but Elias caught the leader's wrist, shoving it aside. They grappled in the rain, boots slipping, hands grasping for whatever would give an edge. The leader's knife flashed, catching Elias across the ribs. Pain bloomed hot, but he held fast, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They went down hard, rolling through the muck until Elias's hand found the barrel of his own rifle lying in the mud. One shot, point blank, tore through the storm's noise. The leader went still, eyes open to the rain. Elias stayed there a moment, breath ragged, the heat of his own blood spreading under his shirt. Around him, the fight faltered. Without their leader, the riders broke, peeling away into the night, their shapes swallowed by the storm. He staggered his feet, pressing a hand to the wound. May was at his side in moments, her face pale under the rain, her hands trying to find a way to stop the bleeding. "Take the children," he said, his voice low but certain, "through the root cellar. Follow the creek north. Don't stop till you find cover." She shook her head, rain and tears indistinguishable. "You can still—" No, his eyes found hers, steady despite the weight settling into his limbs. "You run. That's the only way this means anything." The boy stood in the doorway of the cellar, the girl clutching his arm, bristle pressed against her legs. Maeve hesitated one heartbeat longer, then nodded once. She took the rifle from his hand and slipped into the cellar with the children, the door closing behind them. Elias leaned against a flagpole, the storm wrapping the fort in smoke and rain. The flag above him, tattered as it was, still caught the wind, snapping hard against the sky. The pain was fading, replaced by a cold that spread through him like the night itself. His last sight was a ridge beyond the gate, pale in the breaking dawn, the rain easing into mist. Somewhere out there, Maeve and the children were moving, small shapes against a land too wide to remember names. The trail would hold. For now, that was enough.